High Court in Johannesburg has placed embattled airline Comair under provisional liquidation. That decision comes after the company declared that it is unable to fulfill its financial obligations. So now the question is, how exactly does this liquidation process work, and how are consumers going to be affected by it? Let's get you some legal analysis now. We're joined by attorney and director at Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr, Roxanne Webster. She joins us in studio this morning. Great to have you here. It's a big and very emotive issue, this issue of Comair. Tell us about the decision made in the High Court yesterday around provisional liquidation being granted. What does that mean?
So, provisional liquidation was granted yesterday in the High Court at the instance of the business rescue practitioners of Comair. So, let's just take a step back a bit. So, Comair was placed into business rescue proceedings, I think, in May 2020.
Yeah.
So, they went through their business rescue proceedings for about 2 years. And during that business rescue proceedings, the business rescue practitioners are obviously tasked with the mandate to try and rescue Comair. And by doing that, they're trying to get funds to operate the company, to pay employees, etc. So during those 2 years, they actually got the funding. But because of all the lockdown restrictions, the suspension of flights, and funds actually running out, they've now come to a decision that they cannot any longer operate Comair, the flights, and they have to immediately apply. So they applied last week, Thursday, to the High Court to suspend or discontinue the business rescue proceedings and place the company into provisional liquidation. So the court yesterday granted the provisional liquidation order, and that essentially means that on the 26th of July, that will be the next court hearing date, is when affected parties can obviously try and come to court and say why they think the provisional order shouldn't be made final.
Okay.
But it's unlikely in these circumstances.
Who would be those affected parties?
So it's always creditors, shareholders, employees. Sometimes you see the trade unions are very active in this sphere, so it can possibly be them. But it's unlikely, given these circumstances where business rescue practitioners have tried to save the company, that someone can come in and say to the court, well, it shouldn't be liquidated.
So that's why the order is called provisional, because there is that 26th of July deadline.
Yes.
In terms of the business rescue practitioners, so they started their work with Comair, as you say, in May of 2020. Would it be too harsh to say that Richard Ferguson, who is leading the BRPs for Comair, that he's failed in his mandate to keep Comair in the skies? Or would you say COVID-19 has played a massive role in impeding his work?
I think COVID has played a massive role in impeding his work. They secured a substantial funding. If you would look at the court papers, they secured substantial funding to try and rescue the company. And they actually did for the flights, there was substantial flights.
Yeah.
But because of the various waves of COVID and the lockdown restrictions, it severely hampered their abilities, as well as you also recall that their flights were grounded a few months ago because of technical issues. So that just exacerbated the position.
Yeah, because of several safety concerns, in fact.
Yes.
I mean, the question becomes, why is Comair unable to do the work of keeping Kulula and British Airways in the skies when other airlines have managed to survive COVID-19?
Sure, I think that would generally be a question that the public does have. But I think these circumstances, unfortunately, with Comair, we can't say for sure why. Certainly Comair didn't succeed.
Roxanne, let me ask you this. In terms of the work that the business rescue practitioners do, what kind of payment do BRPs receive in the rescuing operations that they try in a situation like this?
So their fees are determined by statutes, the Companies Act. So the Companies Act regulates the hourly fees that they can charge for a company, but depending on the size of the company. So it is regulated by statute.
In terms of what Comair has now set out in its documents, it says they want to preserve the value of its fleet. It's worth about they've listed 3.5 billion rand in terms of assets, but liabilities come to 4 billion, as far as I understand. What does that mean?
So essentially it means that their liabilities exceed their assets. So they don't have enough assets to actually pay all the debt.
That doesn't bode well for customers who are hoping to get refunds for flights they've booked.
Yes.
So how far down on the list of creditors would a customer be?
Substantially far down the
Really?
list. So customers, and I was reading the other morning that if customers have booked their flights through Discovery or some of the banking institutions and paid EFTs or used their cards, that's their first protocol,
right,
is to consider those avenues first, because I think some of the banks have a chargeback policy,
yes,
where they can claim their refund back. But if not, and if that fails, obviously they become a concurrent creditor, meaning that they have to wait in line for all the other creditors, the employees, to be paid first, the secured creditors, meaning those that have security over the assets, for them to be paid first before it comes to them. So if you purchased a flight ticket to Cape Town for 2,500 Rand, assuming that we'd get 10 cents for every Rand that is owed, they probably only get 250 Rand, if any.
If any. I mean, I imagine people who are watching this are completely shocked. And there's nothing in law that protects a customer in an instance like this.
Unfortunately not.
So what would be your advice for people who are watching this and who are maybe crying into their morning coffee at home?
I think take comfort in going in and exhausting all avenues with the banking institutions, because I see they have really come on board to try and see how they can assist their customers, especially if you've booked through the Vitality program. They have looked at seeing how they can assist their customers. So that should be your first protocol. And because this is such a massive impact on the aviation industry, those institutions have actually risen to the occasion to see how they can accommodate their customers.
And then, of course, there's the issue of workers who are also waiting in line, who were also sidelined by this 11th hour grounding.
Yeah.
What would be the process now if I'm an employee of Comair? To try and, if I'm on a contract, if I'm on a permanent contract, what are the different permutations about me getting any kind of settlement out of the deal?
So once the provisional order is granted, which was yesterday, employment contracts are immediately suspended. So that means the worker or employees no longer have to provide services, but they also cannot be paid.
Sure.
Once the liquidator comes on board and a liquidator is appointed, he then has the power to terminate those contracts. But he must go through his consultation processes to do that. And those consultation processes generally to see whether the business can be sold, and those employees then can go with that business. But after that, generally in these circumstances, if there's no one willing to come in and buy the assets and the employees with it, those employment contracts will be terminated. Generally, if the liquidator doesn't terminate those contracts, within 45 days after his appointment, those contracts are immediately terminated.
Sure.
Which means then the employees only sit with a claim against the estate. And now that is also limited. So you will get your salary or your wages, your leave pay, your severance pay, but that's limited in terms of statutory legislation to approximately 30,000 Rand.
And so I'm not going to be paid out for the duration of my contract?
No.
Yeah. Roxanne Webster, unfortunately you didn't come into studio to give us any good news this morning.
Sorry about that.
Speaking to us here about the different permutations Comair placed under provisional liquidation just yesterday. Certainly one of the big stories we're tracking for you.